I was a Awe scholar during my senior year as an undergraduate at UC Berkeley, which meant I got the opportunity to do year-long mentored and funded research. I explored the positive emotions in autistics, specifically the emotion of awe. It was kind of super awesome, pun intended, to research awe, and that too with the guidance of Professor Dacre Keltner, who has done the seminal research on awe. I will start with background. So what got me interested in this topic? During my interview with Professor Keltner for the Daily Californian, he had mentioned that the human capacity for awe is our defining feature. This really caught my attention, as I feel much of what I'm inspired to do is driven by awe. This slide from my undergraduate human happiness course explains what awe is. Awe is the feeling of being in the presence of something vast and mysterious that transcends your current frame of reference and requires that you seek integration and meaning. By the way, that's me sitting at the back table, next to Devon, my aide. Benefits of awe include less stress, greater happiness, expanded sense of time, reduced activation of the cytokine system, which produces inflammation, and a greater sense of community. It turns out that you benefit from even small doses of awe. In a Keltner lab study, participants were asked to stare up at these tall grove eucalyptus trees on the UC Berkeley campus. Almost immediately after looking up at the trees, the participants displayed more pro-social behaviors, like becoming more helpful towards strangers. In another study, when the elderly took 15-minute awe-oriented walks, they reported more joy and smiles. So I thought, how can I understand and extend these benefits to a marginalized group, namely, autistics? And can awe be a useful tool in the autistic coping toolbox? Incidentally, this grove of eucalyptus trees is amongst the tallest in the western United States. And I kept this image as the slide background, so you can all experience some awe even as you are listening to research on awe. So what's at stake? Autistics face a dual challenge. One is to navigate their own disability, which can look different across the spectrum, and include medical co-occurring issues, and other diagnoses. We need to find solutions on this front. Another is navigating societal barriers and stigma, which often takes a very deficit-based approach to us. We need to overturn misconceptions on this front. To cut to the chase, autistics come up short in a majority of past studies around emotion recognition and emotion processing. But what about our positive emotional experience? This study had 3 hypotheses which are paraphrased on the slide. At the dispositional level, did autistics report lower positive emotions like compassion and awe, which are known to predict health and well-being? A second hypothesis looked at how autistics differed in terms of the various dimensions of the awe experience. A third hypothesis used written narratives to look at how causes, appraisals and the unfolding experiences of autistics differed from that of neurotypicals. Next up are methods. The study had 100 autistics and 100 controls who were matched for age and education level. We made use of several established psychological scales, as well as short narratives. I want to highlight a couple of these measures. This scale breaks down the awe experience into 6 components. The first is altered time perception, in that time seems to slow down. Self-loss is the feeling of smallness. Connectedness with others. Awe is associated with noticeable physiological changes, like goosebumps, chills and widened eyes. Perceived vastness is the magnitude of the stimuli, like when you visit the Grand Canyon. The need for accommodation refers to the cognitive shift when we try to get our head around an awe experience that we did not quite mentally grasp. The awe study also made use of short written narratives of awe and pride. Prior studies have indicated no significant difference between autistics and non-autistics for the emotion of pride, so pride was our control emotion. I helped expand on an awe coding system from the Keltner lab, so as to quantify the awe written narratives. The coding looked at all elicitors, dimensions of awe, whether they mentioned a vertical nature of awe or a group community. We also coded for social appraisal themes like unity, achievement, power and discover, etc. To reduce interpretation bias, I had 4 undergraduate research assistants to do the actual awe coding. Next up are results, and this research has been a treasure trove of information. We will be looking at results from the psychological measures, the Awe-coding, and additional insights that emerged from autistic narratives. The first set of results are from the psychological measures. If you think about it, results are like stories really. The first story is around income and socioeconomic status. There were statistically significant differences in income and subjective socioeconomic status between the autistic and control group. It's best illustrated with this graph, where participants were asked to place themselves on a social ladder. Almost a quarter autistics placed themselves on rung 3, versus quarter neurotypicals on rung 7 of the ladder. It seems to hint that being disabled comes with a social cost. To give you a heads up on how the next set of results are presented. Autistics are yellow, as that is my favorite color, and the neurotypicals are blue. For each trait or emotion, just look at how the yellow bar is positioned relative to the blue bar in the graph. Remember, lower is not a bad thing. It often just means different. Another story is on personality traits. Autistics self-report that they are more open to experience. Autistics report they are more neurotic. Neuroticism is the tendency to experience negative emotions, such as anger, anxiety, or depression. Next, let's look at the story of dispositional experience of positive emotions in autistics. We found that autistics reported different trait-like tendencies to experience various positive emotions. Autistics scored higher for dispositional awe. Autistics scored higher in dispositional compassion compared to neurotypicals. Autistics reported less contentment. Autistics reported less love. The results were controlled for income, SES, and personality traits, since those had shown group differences. The result for awe did not hold when controlled. This suggests that income, personality traits, and SES could account for the group differences in dispositional awe, in keeping with studies finding that with increased income, feelings of awe are reduced. However, the other results held when controlled. Taken together, these results depart from an emotion deficit model of autism. While autistics reported less love and contentment, they reported more trait-like experiences of compassion and awe. It suggests a more outward, other-oriented focus in trait-like positive emotion for autistics. Given the previous findings, autism and awe was explored. The next story is around the semantic dimensions of awe, as measured by the Awe experience scale. Autistics reported a higher altered time perception during an awe experience. Autistics reported a higher need for accommodation. Autistics also reported lower physiological sensations during an awe experience. The results held, when controlled for income, SES, and personality traits. The autistic experience of awe seems to involve greater shifts in time perception, to involve more accommodation or cognitive processing of the experience, and to involve fewer bodily sensations. The next set of result stories are from the Awe-coding. We will start with elicitors of awe. This is a frequency graph of all elicitors. The different categories of all elicitors we identified were nature-related, personal or self-focused events, other people, big ideas or epiphanies, mystical or spiritual, visual design, music, collective movement, life and death. A chi-squared analysis revealed significant group differences. In line with earlier studies, nature served as the most powerful elicitor for both groups. For autistic participants, visual design, which is impersonal by nature, served as a more common elicitor when compared with elicitors like other people, collective movement, life and death, all involving a social component. The preceding results suggest that other people were less relevant to the autistic experience of awe. The next story from Awe-coding is around the vertical nature of awe. Vertical nature is linked to a higher relationship of some kind. Submissiveness, acknowledging a higher power in fear or reverence, status differences, hierarchy, power, etc. Chi-squared analysis revealed that autistics were significantly less concerned about the vertical nature of awe. The third story from Awe-coding was around ratings of elicitors and social appraisal. We coded ratings for additional dimensions of awe, such as sense of divine, beauty, absolute truth, moral purpose, and whether the experience was threatening. We also coded for social appraisal themes like unity, togetherness, power, discovery, self-reflection, and community. Autistic's narratives of awe included a higher sense of the divine and a higher sense of the truth compared to those of neurotypicals. The autistic experience of awe was less guided by a sense of moral purpose. In the social appraisal themes in awe, we found that discovery and self-reflection were less prominent for autistics. This again highlights the abstract, disorienting, away from the physical body nature of the awe experience for autistics. There were additional insights from the autistic narratives. We will start with valence, how autistics looked at positive and negative awe. In terms of frequency, both groups were almost matched for positive and negative awe. What was interesting was group differences in the language used to describe positive awe. All the neurotypical responses framed their reaction to positive awe in glowing positive language, almost inspiration-like. In sharp contrast, a third of autistics thought of positive awe as absence of negative. Autistics used language indicating less of something, like less worry or less alone or escape, or that this was a situation where they were the ones not at fault for not providing a socially appropriate response. Now let's look at how autistics viewed negative awe. If you remember, I started off the presentation with the idea of the use of small doses of awe. Why? Because navigating society demands you understand rules and environmental cues. An awe situation was often in the non-understandable realm. So when autistics are not able to quickly wrap their heads around a situation, it led to a feeling of loss of control, which in turn increased stress. It led to imagining negative outcomes, or maybe worrying that I'm missing something. So for some autistics, positive awe was viewed as less of the negative, while negative awe was not understanding. Another insight story is around the creative process. A number of autistics thought that awe was a motivator in the creative process. One of the participant comments was on something that I, as an autistic, have often reflected upon. Things that inspire awe leads to special interests in autistics, and the special interests in autistics often drives their creative process. Next are insights around sensory differences, synesthesia and alexithymia. There were mentions of synesthesia, alexithymia and sensory processing in the autistic narratives, though this had not been specifically asked for in the study. Synesthesia is when the stimulation of one sensory modality stimulates additional modalities like hearing music and also physically feeling music simultaneously. Alexithymia is the difficulty in identifying and describing emotions experienced by oneself. Sensory processing is the way our body receives and processes stimuli. Autistics reported that the presence of sensory processing differences and synesthesia served to highly heighten, to the point of being overwhelming, or even dampen the emotional experience for a positive or negative effect of awe. Autistics who identified with alexithymia reported that they had no problems identifying the emotion of awe, as it was such a strong, almost visceral emotion. Which makes me wonder if awe can be used to study alexithymia and interoception in autism. Interoception is the sense that helps you understand what's going on inside your body, like knowing when you are sick, hungry, tired, which are important for self-regulation. Self-regulation being an issue many autistics struggle with. Another insight was around mental health. There was a recurring theme of mental health in the narratives, which touched on bullying, anxiety, trauma, sadness, self-doubt, self-criticism, misunderstanding, and burnout in navigating society. Autistics also pointed to the benefits of awe experiences on mental health. For example, one respondent says that it reminded them of an attribute that helped their self-worth. Another pointed to the time-altering factor of awe, slowing them down and giving them time to process emotions instead of being overwhelmed. Finally, I want to come to insights on awe as a coping tool. There seems to be general consensus that awe is helpful. And coming back to alexithymia, a suggestion was that an externally triggered experience of awe could bring more awareness to the internal emotional experience. A few, however, add a note of caution, as awe is such an highly individual experience. For autistics who were easily overwhelmed, small doses of awe would work better. If you remember, I started off the presentation with the idea of the use of small doses of awe. That was a lot. To summarize, it turns out that far from being emotionally deficient, This study reveals a rich and deep emotional life of autistics. They feel more distress and compassion for others. They feel more awe, especially on awe tied to the body. There are similar patterns in many stigmatized marginalized groups. From the autistic narratives we got additional insights into positive and negative awe, the creative process, interplays of sensory processing, mental health and awe as a coping tool. Since pride was used as a control emotion, findings from the pride narratives are briefly mentioned here. Look at the differences in the elicitors of pride, especially the ones with the red star. 22 autistics found pride in recognition of their accomplishments by others, compared to just 4 neurotypicals. Does that sound familiar? We want societal acceptance and inclusion. 27 autistics also found pride in advocacy and helping others compared to only 10 neurotypicals. As a disabled person, I can relate to advocacy being a critical skill in our life. I want to end the Our Research talk by recommending that everyone incorporate small doses of awe in their everyday life. What's good about awe is you can find small doses all around you. Just stop to let it sink in. We pay too much for all sorts of therapies. Let awe be an inexpensive and easily accessible tool in our coping toolbox.